So, as you know, last night I had this dinner after work, but
Okay.
what the dinner was my
I don't think I knew
school. Oh, okay. Well, I went to a dinner after work yesterday, and
that.
my
Okay.
K through 12 school from Los Angeles, I guess, does a seventh grade trip to Washington, D.C. now. So I met them at this restaurant, and
That's a big trip.
at the end of the restaurant, I went to the bathroom before hopping on the metro, and there were some of the students in there. So I said, "Hey, like, what year are you guys?" And they said, "Class of 2029." And I was like, "Oh, I was class of '07." And they said, "That's before I was born."
Yep.
All right, welcome to another episode of Working on the Dad Pod. If this is your first time listening, thank you so much for being here. For those of you who are returning, as you know, we took last week off and you got our road trip snack draft. Tonight, we are actually going to be discussing the concept of toxic masculinity. But before we get into that, I am Ethan. This is my co-host Alex. Please remember to like and subscribe to this podcast on YouTube. Make sure you hit the bell for notifications so you know when there's bonus episodes or when we're going live on screen. Given this new software we're using, hashtag StreamYard up in the corner. We have the ability to post the videos almost immediately after we record. So if you are looking to watch us on a Thursday night around 11 o'clock to talk about toxic masculinity, you're in luck. If you just want to hear it on your commute to work, in the shower, morning doo-doo, you can listen to us on anywhere you get your podcasts. And now that I've butchered our open, how you doing, Alex?
I am good. As you alluded to, I was on vacation last week. You'll be on vacation next week, so it's good to see your beautiful face after a couple of
Oh,
weeks. Spent last week in lovely Tampa, Florida, for the kids' spring break, and had a great time. So excited to get into it today.
yeah, I'm glad you guys had a good time. But as you all know, before we get into the topic, we start with story time. And if you don't mind, Alex, I'm gonna go first. So, as what's been typically happening this season two of the podcast, my story, I tend to have like really eventful Thursdays after school. And today, my wife and I picked up our daughters from school like we normally do. And it's a little chilly today. We were also a little bit later to pick up than we normally would. So
Yeah.
we pretty much went into it knowing there wasn't going to be after school playground. Our 4-year-old had a meltdown as we were leaving school, so upset that we weren't going to the playground, to the point where my wife told me to take the 18-month home in the stroller and to get started on dinner, and that she and the 4-year-old would get here eventually. So went ahead and did that. I guess they talked it out, and they were okay when they got home. So my wife was okay with letting her watch an episode of Daniel Tiger. For those of you who don't know, Daniel Tiger is usually 2 stories per episode. So she had enough time for 1 story before dinner. And when it was time to come to the table, the meltdown started all over again. And I lost my cool big time. And the moment I lost my cool was when she told me that if I wasn't nice and this is actually similar to something that happened last week. But tonight I wasn't nice because I made dinner and asked her to eat the dinner. She then said she's going to get a new daddy. And that was about 20 minutes into the meltdown. So then I said, great, that can start now. And, it kept getting worse. So I'll end the story there. But what's very sad is, as you know, today is Thursday, March 21st. It is the first day of the March Madness men's basketball tournament. It is arguably supposed to be one of the happiest days of the year, and I had a bad day. So that's
Sorry.
a real bummer.
I'm sorry to hear that. I am happy to hear that
Cheers.
it wasn't because of sports gambling that you had a bad day, because that
No,
can
I
be
am
the
I am up today. I am up
there you
today.
go.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry to hear that maybe you didn't handle that as well as you
I
could
did
have.
not.
But to all our dads listening that got their vasectomies this week so that they could be sitting on the couch recovering under doctor's orders, watching basketball under doctor's orders, we salute you. Way to go.
Well done. Well done. I actually
For
just
me, go ahead.
listened to our vasectomies episode from season 1 the
There you
other
go.
day and was thinking,
There you go.
I should have timed this better.
Yeah. So for me, obviously, as you've listened to that episode or want to go back, I've had a vasectomy, so I am not part of that troop. And because my son was born in late February, I had not reserved the vasectomy in time to get it done for March Madness. Basically wanted to make sure we had a happy, healthy baby and that we were sure we were done having kids. And so I got it done a couple months after, unfortunately. But this week for me has been wacky. And the reason it's been wacky has been because it is wacky week at the kids' preschool, which is the dumbest thing in my mind.
Mm.
I hate it. And I've seen on social media, this is a common refrain among parents. I'm sure you had wacky weeks. I had some in middle school and high school. But I see memes all the time of just, all these things that I don't know if they're trying to promote school spirit or just like, we're going to try and shake things up and have fun. And you've got to dress the kids in certain outfits so that they feel a part of it. And especially at this age, they barely know what it means. But it's been
So,
frustrating. Go ahead.
so I've had like Spirit Week and stuff. Is that essentially what this
Sure.
is? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
okay,
It's
all right,
it's you dress funny, right? So there was
okay.
a mix match clothes day. There
Mm.
was a today was throwback day. And my daughter was apparently the only one who dressed up in her class. Like we sent her in her ballet clothes, and then she has these like bright
Oh
pink like leggings. And so we put them on, and
no.
because of the leotard and the tights and the leggings, she looked like an 80s like workout video was the vibe we were going for.
Mm.
My son did not go to school today, so he just dressed in normal clothes. But both Tuesday and Thursday, my wife has been stressing about uh what to dress my son in. I'm like, he's going to Mimi's house. And she's like, oh, great. Yeah, that's right. So it's been frustrating just because I'm like, this is dumb and a lot of work. But the thing that sort of set me over the edge is the reason they have picked this week to do it. As you probably know, this week is leading up to Purim. I may have butchered that. It may be
Mm.
Purim, but I'm pretty sure it's Purim.
You're
And,
correct. Purim. Yeah.
okay. Thank
Yeah.
you. But it's leading
Mhm.
up to Purim. And so tomorrow they have a Purim parade that all the kids are
Mm.
participating in. And because that's a dress up holiday, for those that don't know, you dress up similar to Halloween, but it's a Jewish holiday. And so, hey, let's dress up the whole week. Let's make it a whole big thing was kind of the vibes. We get a message on Monday from my son's teachers that's like, hey, parents, for our costume this year, our class is going to be doing thing one and thing two costumes from the Cat in the Hat. Can you please send your child a plain red shirt to use for their costume? Fine. that's not a big ask. It's just the fact that it's on Monday morning. I'm like, I would have
Mm.
appreciated this. Granted, the week before was spring break, but I'm like, I would have appreciated this on Friday or the Friday before. If you don't want to send messages to parents outside of your working hours, I get and respect that. But the foresight to be like, let's give parents a weekend to go out
Yeah.
to stores and get the thing you need, right? So it involved my wife and I going to Michael's last night as part of our date night with the kids out of the house, going to Michael's
Ooh.
to pick up because Michael's was the only place. Walmart was out of these shirts,
Yeah.
Target was out of these shirts, Old Navy was out of these shirts. And so we're like, found out Michael's has a very big selection for some obvious reasons of plain t-shirts, like Gildan brand, just plain t-shirts. So it
Mhm.
was like
Yep.
$3 to get him a little red t-shirt and fine. But I'm like, come on. It's such a pain in the butt to dress them and make them feel like they are being included in all the group activities. But you're making me go out and like buy costumes week of. I find it, at least my daughter's class, it was like for their costume, we just need them to wear any plain colored shirt. And my wife
Right.
goes, "It'd be a dress." And they're like, "Yep." And we're like, "Great. We're just going to tell her it has to be this dress today instead of the other dress that she's probably going to want to wear, and it'll
Mhm.
lessen the blow." So that's
Yeah.
my rant story time. To all the parents out there that deal with wacky weeks, spirit weeks, dress up your kid weeks, I'm sorry. And this is probably the second one that we've done. And I'm just like, I'm already over it.
So
And I know it's going to continue until my son graduates high school.
yeah, so we have them in our preschool, but the notice is there. Like it is on like the year, like the calendar for the school year, and like at
You got to
least the month
notice that the
before.
week was happening. I'm more upset about the shirt. The shirt was short notice. It
Sure.
wasn't
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
a Monday morning,
Yeah.
it's wacky week. We got that a few weeks
Right.
before. I'm
Right.
fine with that, like whatever. But
So right. What I'm saying is like we get the week in like the upcoming school year calendar, and then we get like the theme like at least a couple weeks before.
yeah,
So
I mean, that's
yeah.
helpful, but it's the
Yeah.
fact of the parade and the costume,
Mhm.
and like it's I don't think it's the first time. I think last year's parade was a similar thing of like we need a plain white shirt or something like that,
Mhm.
for the class. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
again, stop telling me on Monday.
Right.
But
But
it
yeah,
is what it is.
solid color shirts. Michael's is always a good place to go, as you mentioned.
As I
They're
found
cheap
out,
and yeah. But but yeah, no, I've actually recorded in a plain color Michael's shirt before. So
there you go. Good to know.
Mhm.
Fun
Yep.
fact behind the scenes kind of info there, only for our paid subscribers.
Yeah. Right, right. That's $1 million take right there.
Yeah. Well, should we get into a topic that I have been looking forward to talking about ever since we started the
Yeah.
podcast, really? It's been one of those
Hmm.
that I don't know exactly if we've ever made a concerted effort to put it off, but it's just never felt like the right time. But yeah, I'm excited to
Mhm.
talk about some toxic masculinity
I'm
because
excited.
I think it's
Oh, I was just
pervasive
gonna say,
issue.
yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, I displayed plenty of it tonight. So, you know.
Yeah, I think yeah, it can be an all-encompassing thing, but where I'll start, I think, is just a definition as I've found it, and I think it's a term that one way I've heard it described is it has been used in women's studies classes for many a decade, but came into the mainstream over the last few years, especially across social media as a way to describe some male behaviors. But some of the things that
Mhm.
I have heard used to describe it is just a feeling of needing to do things that are traditionally masculine, because if you don't do them, you should consider yourself or others should feel right in considering you less of a man, right? So doing things that are manly because they're manly, and that
Mhm.
extends in a variety of areas, but essentially projecting a facade of being a tough guy, of talking down to other people, of trying to use strength and power, whether physically or verbally, and intimidation as sort of your methods of asserting control over a situation or communicating yourself just to other people and how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there are a variety of ways that this manifests, both as dads, just as male gendered members of the human race, and then ways it manifests as a parent,
Mm-hmm.
and how it can impact your kids. But I think starting off for me, the interesting thing is just, as you mentioned, it's not something that I think there are very few of us that don't display some attributes of toxic masculinity on some degree, because I think it's probably one of those things, it's a spectrum and it's a little bit of eye of the beholder and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
that. But I know for me, one of the biggest things is just growing up, you're told certain things are for boys and certain
Mm-hmm.
things are for girls. And like, you do this because that's what men do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Men, mow the lawn, men
Mm-hmm.
fix things around the house, men do the heavy lifting, men are the primary breadwinners, men are the ones who provide for their family, right? The stereotypes of women being at home and men, bringing home the bacon,
Mm-hmm.
is toxic masculinity, because it's not just like what men should be doing, but it's also a lot of what women shouldn't be doing can be blended
Right.
into this toxic masculinity. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's always been something where like I don't find that my dad, and from my 2 cents, I don't find your dad either, and I'm not just pandering to some of our most loyal listeners here. I don't find them to overly display, toxic masculine traits of trying to project these huge tough guy facades. They're pretty normal guys, and they don't seem to dip into, like I've watched my dad, and I don't know how your dad is once he got a granddaughter, because like your dad, my dad never been a father to a daughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
But grandpa to a granddaughter, I have watched them put on some dress up and have some tea parties and do some things that I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I never thought I would see this man doing this. Same goes for my father-in-law. So I will say that I don't think I grew up in an environment that was above average in what it conveyed. I just think as a child of the 90s, I think there were a lot of things in our life of, like little things in our daily language and how we did things of like,
Mm-hmm.
this is a woman's thing and this is a man's thing. And like, yeah, I don't know. What's
Yeah.
been your experience with toxic masculinity?
Yeah. So I think like you said, it's a term that has been in like women's studies for a long time, but I really did start hearing it more over the last few years. And I think kind of like the line on whether to, you know, characterize somebody as displaying toxic masculinity on a regular basis is kind of if they kept it up in the mid 2000s. What I mean by that is, like you mentioned, like our dads do not display toxic masculinity in the way that we think of in the news, but they are like boomer dads um, who grew up in a time where like men did men things and women did women things, and my mom worked and at one point in their relationship was the primary breadwinner. My dad did most of the cooking. My dad uh, usually drove my brother and I to school, but there were some things that I associated with my dad is the boy and he does this, like some certain housework or um, driving the longer road trips, or like you said, the one who carried the biggest luggage. And, those are some things that I do too for some other reasons. But it's more of there was a time in popular culture when things were happening in the news. We'd hear about it in real time, and politics were changing. And then there was a group of people who didn't change with it. And I don't necessarily mean going from conservative to liberal. I just mean going from like ignoring what is PC, or because I'm totally blanking. I've had a bad day.
Yeah,
PC
no,
meaning
just like
politically
I get what
correct.
you're
Yeah.
saying, where it's like
Yeah.
the general zeitgeist, what everybody thinks
Hmm.
has shifted, and you
Yeah.
have gone from being in the middle to now you're an outlier, and you're
Right.
fighting against the fact that you're an outlier on the chart
Yeah.
instead of in the middle, right?
And
And
that is, yeah. And our dads did not fight as outliers. They adapted to times. And I think it's those who are, like you said, like being the outlier, taking pride in not conforming, and really just whining, frankly, which is not manly, to not want to adapt to change. And that's,
yeah.
to me, the people that like I tend to identify with as being toxically masculine.
Right, and I think that's the most toxic of it, right? When I think of toxic masculinity in 2024, I think a lot about um Andrew Tate, who is an influencer. If you don't know him, don't feel bothered to look him up, but he's a former mixed martial artist. He's under trial for like sex trafficking or something like that. But he's basically got an ethos and a please don't fist bump that. I know
No,
that was
it was like
sarcasm.
it was a sarcastic fist bump. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, listeners only.
Yeah.
Everyone watching knows that there was sarcasm there.
Sure. But he has an ethos that basically it's very much in line with the ideas that you might see online now of like being an alpha or being a
Hmm.
Chad or something like that. That you are representing all the things that are strong and virile and manly, and you have these expectations of the people around you that they will treat you a certain way if you convey a certain energy. And I don't know, for lack of a better term, it's like homies think they're the main character, right? Where it's just like you're not, you're just some bro on the internet who is having trouble relating to people on a human level, and so you're resorting to instead of looking inward. And I think goes back to what you were talking about the spectrum of like instead of looking inward and going, am I doing something wrong? It's sort of that whole, the Principal Skinner gif of like, no, it's the children who are wrong, right? It's just
Hmm.
it's everybody else. It can't be
Hmm.
me because my values didn't change. The world went crazy, right? Is sort
Yeah.
of the ethos. And like we've lost our sense of traditional American values. And I'm like, if you go back far enough, some of those values are even more effed up than the things these guys are espousing.
Hmm.
So maybe that's not exactly where we should be headed. But I think about it too. So as I was exploring this, it's like those kind of people and the kind of people that gravitate towards them. And there are many other influencers. I don't want to just pick on Andrew Tate, even though I think he deserves to be picked on. But I'm not going to waste all our time naming all the toxic people because there's way too many of them. But I think about it also in like microcosm stuff and little actions, right? And so one of the
Hmm.
biggest things is like how people talk to us when we were attempting to do things that are associated as traditionally masculine, such as throwing a ball, right? You throw like a girl.
Hmm.
I never thought about that phrase, right? You'd say that to your friends all the time in the 90s and not think about how problematic that is. And
Yeah.
I can tell you that, like, yeah, I'm not going to get into some, pseudoscience like biology here, but one thing I do know about basic biology, and it's the only thing I'll say, is yeah, there are some factors of like men are more genetically predispositioned to the gross motor skills, such as like throwing, running, like stronger things, and women are traditionally taking the whole population and averaging it
Hmm.
better at fine motor skills, we will see in like handwriting or maybe sewing, right? But again, the problem with that is it takes these like very rudimentary textbook things of biology, and then instead of going on average and understanding what that means, and then applies it to everyone. So to identify as a male, You have to be
Mhm.
up here better than, the female species at this thing, and you can't be good at the other thing because that's a girly thing to do. And
And
that's where you get the toxic part of it, where it's just like, okay, yes, I think everybody recognizes that if the NBA champs played the WNBA champs, that the NBA champs would win the basketball game, but that doesn't mean
mhm.
that the WNBA players aren't really, really damn good at what
Yeah,
they do, right? And
and
that's where, like,
and would
discounting the
still and would still probably beat 99% of any other all male team.
yeah, I'm not gonna get into the
Yeah,
odds on that because I think we could get
yeah.
comment warriors
Sure,
disagreeing with
sure.
us on that, and
Yeah.
but I will say that I used to work in college athletics, and one of my
Mhm.
responsibilities, I was working with a D1 softball team. I played little league baseball, right? I still have a pretty decent arm. If I could throw like those girls, I'd be throwing a lot better, right? So, like, the phrase
Yeah,
"throwing like a girl," it really just depends. I we got a broken window one time from my daughter throwing a wooden ball.
there
She
you go.
hasn't kept with it as much. My son is probably the
Mhm,
better thrower, not to feed into the
mhm.
stereotypes, but
I felt like you just fed into it there, for sure, for sure.
yeah, I mean, I used an anecdotal example because, again, we're saying on average, and,
Mhm.
maybe it pains to me to admit it that my kids are just a little average. I don't know, but
Yeah.
um,
I do I do wanna say before we get going, just and
I
I was
feel like
kinda
we're going,
saying it in
man.
a and well, yes, well, before we keep going, and I did feel like I was, roundabout alluding to it before, but for your example, you throw like a girl or you do this like a girl. In around the year 2000, that shifted to um, rampant homophobia, where it was no longer you throw like a
Sure.
girl was
Yeah.
that throw was kind of gay, and
Yeah.
that is something that set a lot of people back today. That I want to apologize for ever taking
Yeah.
part in it. Yeah,
Yeah. And I guess that would probably have to be classified differently as toxic homophobia or toxic
I mean it's still toxic
heteronormative.
masculine. It's still toxic
Sure.
masculinity
Sure,
because
because you're automatically
because
assuming because of
yeah,
someone's sexuality that they're gonna display more feminine traits, which, I mean, based on some of the pro athletes that have come out of the closet, is not true. They kicked my
right,
ass up and down the field 10 times without breaking a sweat.
exactly.
So, yeah, I agree with that, but I think where it comes back, and I as we've grown up, it's like those were the issues that I often saw, where it was like, here's the language that we've got, here's the, you throw like a girl, all that stuff. But one of the worst ways it manifests, to go back to our mental health episode, is it then becomes a struggle for men to open up, because a lot of what toxic masculinity is about is, keeping it in and keeping this strong facade and not letting people know that you're bothered by them or what's going on. And so it leads to people keeping it in and not, discussing their feelings, going to therapy, or even just to scale down from that, like talking to their friends and their spouse and their loved ones about what's going on in their life. And it one of the articles that I was reading about to get ready for this episode was from, I want to say, the American Association of Anxiety and Depression or something like that, but a mental health awareness organization. And so it's just something that I think bleeds over, where you start as a little boy and it's like, oh, I don't want to seem like a girl. I want to run fast. I want to throw hard. Oh, I don't want to seem like a girl and, you know, not and not do ballet because ballet is not masculine, right? I'll tell you, I got cute videos of my son throwing on tutus and doing, really bad routines of ballet with my daughter, and I'm not planning on stopping it. I'm like, for me, it's like one of those things where, again, I mentioned he's good at throwing, and he's kind of big for his age. I think we talked about that last time, but he, just because of that doesn't mean I want to push him into sports because he'd be good at it and he'd be a really good, strong athlete. It's like, well, I want him to enjoy it. But we had this moment, and I feel like maybe I'm going all over the place here, but we had this moment when my son was growing up, probably 9, 10 months, and he was starting to, mumble things and start to get a few little words out. And we wanted to identify his sister. And my wife started using the term sissy. And he still calls her sissy
Mm.
sometimes. He calls her by her name. He calls her by her nickname. He screams at her, does a lot of other communicating with her now, but he used the term sissy to describe her as this sweet, affectionate term of endearment. And until that moment, I had never heard that term used outside of derogatory language to describe someone who is not living up to masculine standards.
Yeah, the only time I've ever heard, I'd say before having prevalent children around my life, using the word sissy is not nice to say to somebody. But hey, they're reclaiming the term, and that's good.
I love that.
Yeah. And you mentioned, therapy. And I think that there are two parts of my life where I've had to overcome ingrained toxic masculinity that I didn't really know I was displaying. One is I didn't realize, I'm not saying I was against therapy. As you know, I've been going to therapy for 5 years now. And in my mind, I wasn't not going to therapy for toxic masculinity. It was in my mind, I said, I don't really need it yet. And that in season 1, when we talked about mental health, I said the one thing I wish I could go back and tell myself is to start doing therapy before you need it. So that when something does happen, you're already in a position where you can talk about it. But there was probably a hint of there was definitely a hint of toxic masculinity that I was kind of fighting by saying I don't need therapy yet. Sure. And I think that toxic masculinity probably persisted in the sadness I felt when we learned we were having a second daughter. And I keep telling myself I just wanted to raise one of each, or have one of each. But the truth is, I wanted the opportunity to raise a young man. I wanted to believe that I could raise a person who could rise above the male negativity in the world and not be referred to as a douche and other things that happen on a daily basis. And,
you unpack that. You've told me this before. And have you unpacked that whole statement that you just said? Because it's literally, my toxic masculinity led me to want this thing where I could hopefully end toxic masculinity.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad we're talking about it because it is, and I'm glad you just said that, because I think you very well articulated something I didn't quite put together in my mind, but it's true. When I think about when the goal of being a parent, obviously you want your kids to be happy and healthy, and you hope that they're successful and you hope that they're good people, but you also there's a societal perspective to someone being a good person, and I hope that I have two strong women in my daughters that will defy gender norms and take on toxic masculinity and stick it to the man. But I did also want the opportunity to raise a boy who could not live up to those toxic masculinity standards, or who can take those and turn them around as a positive influence. So I guess you're right. My internal toxic masculinity is trying to take down toxic masculinity in the generation after me. So, you know, I hope you can do that instead.
As having a son, right? I feel those things of those goals that you're mentioning of wanting to raise him better than, I don't want to say than I was raised, but without some of those traits that I exuded. And one thing that we hadn't touched on yet in this conversation is, we met in a college fraternity, right? Which is just a cesspool of toxic masculinity. And like, I think as a fraternity, our group of guys were very much in the middle of the pack in terms of how much we exuded. And yet still I look back on so many moments and I kind of, cringe of just some of the things we talked about, the way we talked to each other, the way we talked about relationships with women, that kind of stuff. There's definitely
The kind of behavior we memorialized.
yes. And in
So,
a lot of regards, right? I know
yeah.
what you're specifically referring to, but generally, yes. Like there are stories that we still tell that you're just sort of like, man, that was
Not
funny.
good.
That was funny 15 years ago, but I don't know
It was
about now.
borderline funny then, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And looking back, you just kind of cringe, but taking that to my son is something that, I haven't really started yet because he just turned 2. And as I already mentioned, he's been dressing up in his sister's tutus, and he's right there in an age where all he wants to do is whatever his sister's doing. And my daughter exudes femininity. And it's actually, I'm more worried about her because she will do things like shorts are for boys, right? This is for boys. This is not girly enough. And she's like kind of constantly on a quest to be feminine enough. And this is not something she gets from my wife. My wife has plenty of femininity, but she is not, like, she is not what I would call like
A girly girl.
striving to be feminine.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter very much is. And I don't think any of the female role models in her life are. So it strikes me very interestingly where she gets some of this stuff from. And honestly, the scary part is some of this stuff, like the shorts thing, I think she gets from her peers, where like a boy in class told her, girls don't wear shorts, boys wear shorts. And so even though I can literally point to her mom wearing shorts and her grandmother's wearing shorts and all sorts of women wearing shorts, a peer said that boys don't wear shorts. And so all of a sudden she doesn't wear shorts. And this has persisted for years, that this girl in 95-degree heat will wear leggings instead of shorts because she will only wear a dress, right? She rarely wears t-shirts. It has to be a very, very special occasion. But she always wears a dress to school, and she has to wear something underneath it because you're not allowed to just wear a dress without, it could be short mid-thigh shorts just to cover it, cover the underwear kind of thing. But she's like, no, I won't do that. It needs to be full-length leggings.
So my 4-year-old's the same way, not in the whole like she won't wear them because boys wear them, but she really like loves pants. No matter how hot it gets, she would rather have pants than shorts. But you did kind of remind me of a quick story I want to tell, and this is where and this related to how you were talking about how your daughter doesn't get that from her mom, your wife, and you're worried it comes from peers. But the first time my wife and I, who just happened to walk by, watched the Olympics together, we were watching women's gymnastics, and one of the Olympians had really weird makeup, and I commented on the makeup, and my wife assumed that was just me and my dad judging women growing up watching the Olympics. And I'm here to defend you, Dad, because I know you're listening, that I immediately said, no. That is what I learned from watching the Olympics with my mother. And you know why it is okay that I am not being a jerk or a toxic masculine man by commenting on her makeup, it's because costumes are graded and makeup is part of the costume, and that goes into their routine score. So you know what? Owned. And yeah, no, she doesn't
Yeah.
really like watching gymnastics with me anymore. But the point is, I am just adhering to the international scoring system. I am not displaying toxic masculinity.
All right. So in our toxic masculinity episode, you have admitted that you want to use toxic masculinity to stop toxic masculinity, fighting fire with fire. And you just admitted that you're not doing toxic masculinity, and spent the
Yeah,
time
no,
working on yourself.
I am all over the all over the place. But
Sure.
and also to defend our dads again, like you said, it's not that you want your son to be raised better than you. You just want to build off how well your dad raised you.
I think it's that, but I think it even goes back to when we were talking about just the era we grew up in
Yeah.
versus now, where that moving of the median zeitgeist, right? And
Mm-hmm.
just like
Staying ahead of the curve.
I'm starting from a different spot
Right.
than my dad was, and just
Mm-hmm.
it's fine.
Yeah.
Kudos to my dad, specifically. Like I think he has moved with the bell curve,
Mm-hmm.
but um, yeah, I'm just starting from a different spot. But I think for me, the most actionable thing, I try not to, I try not to intervene with my daughter on these feminine things. I just try to reassure her, like, you can do this. And usually I'm not the voice
Mm-hmm.
that she needs to hear in that situation. She needs to hear her mom say it, and maybe it'll ring true. She might still argue plenty, but like having your dad come and go, no, that's not girly, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that doesn't always work. But
Right.
my biggest hope is that I think on a very personal level, I think there's a lot of issues with toxic masculinity culturally, but on a personal level, it's like why I hope to do as good a job as possible of like eliminating it or reducing it, mitigating it, whatever the right amount possible
Mm-hmm.
is because I want my children to pursue what makes them happy and
Mm-hmm.
not succumb to some perceived pressure to do things a certain way, to dress a certain way. I know the school's going to have a dress code, but
Sure.
dressing a certain way, appearing a certain way, cutting their hair a certain way, presenting themselves a certain way. And I think that, if either one of them are LGBTQIA plus, like, I think that's kind of like a first step if that happens,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I have obviously no clue. My daughter actually happened to ask the other day, she mentioned something about, yeah, when I marry a boy, um, my husband, and my son pipes up and goes, my husband. And she's like, silly, you can't marry a boy. And my wife and I had to be like, no, you can. And
Yeah.
and we kind of had to have, we didn't go really in depth on it, but it's like, no, if you want to marry a woman, you could marry a woman, and he
Mm.
could marry a man, or he could marry a woman, and you could
Yeah.
marry whatever. And
Every,
so
yeah.
it was interesting that I think it's still sort of like they're just like these ingrained things that somehow just get into our
Mhm.
kids' system, that it's like, just because this is what mom and dad did and grandma and grandpa on both
Mhm.
sides did, that's,
Right.
I guess, just how it has to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. Every once in a while, our 4-year-old will say, "I want a penis," and I'll say to her, "We'll talk about it when you're older. Probably don't want to make that decision until you're like at least 12 to like have the discussion." But I mean, I haven't. If that's how she ends up identifying, great. But I'm basically just telling her, like, make sure you before you go that route, that's what you want.
You make questionable decisions around snack time. I think we
Yeah.
can like leave
Yeah.
anything more serious than that. We can table it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel
So,
that. But yeah, to
mhm.
to to put a bow on it, I don't think it's something, this is not something that we're gonna solve or get rid of.
No.
But I think the task in front of us and listeners is just to recognize it. It's one of those sort of biases where it's like helpful to recognize it, because then you can sort of address it of like, maybe I should have said that. Maybe I shouldn't have done it that way, because as I've alluded to in some of my anecdotes, the kids are always watching, right? And they're not always just taking the information that you sit down and lecture them and talk to them
Mhm.
about and give them a solid conversation about, they're taking in information all the time from all sorts of places, and that is like their primary function on this earth right now, is
Mhm.
just absorbing stuff. And so they're like little sponges. And so how you treat your partner, especially if you're in a heterosexual relationship, how the husband and wife interact with each other.
Mhm.
I'm not going to sit here and give anybody specifics on how to run their marriage, but
Sure.
like, how you interact will speak volumes to your kids,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
how you treat one another and other people of, opposite genders in your interactions will go a long way in sort of informing at least the early stages of how our kids take on those similar types of relationships. So
Yeah. No, for sure.
watch yourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, no, I think this was, good to talk about. I think the 200 to 300 million men listening will do well knowing that it's okay to talk about this.
Yeah, I
And
mean, we're the only people with the platform big enough to counter the Joe Rogans of the world. There we go.
I
I
think
found
so.
somebody
Yeah.
else. So
There you
we got to
go.
do it. Uh
Fellow podcaster Joe Rogan. He's really building something there. I hope he
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
one day maybe we'll
One day.
buy him
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Would you like to get into working on the dad pod? I mean, dub
No,
pod.
I
I
I
get
would
it.
like to finish that part and work on the bod. Yeah,
Okay.
sure. I can
Well,
I can go first, or do you want to go first?
I wanted to go first because
Go for it.
when we last spoke, that was 2 weeks ago, and I was 192.6. Um, I had, as I told you in a group chat, I had a little bit of an epiphany um, about like delaying workouts. And I actually did start working out. And even though you were out of town, I still did my normal Thursday night weigh in. And I went from 192.6 to 194.2. And then today, 195.2. And I'm a little annoyed because I've I've been running a 5K. Since we last recorded, I've run 6 5Ks. And I've done a better job uh, I'm still not eating the best, but I'm doing better than I was. And I'm just annoyed that I'm going up in weight
I
despite the
mean,
fact that I'm doing
how are
better.
your calories? I mean,
I
because
mean, my calories like were still over what I was aiming for, but they were less than what they were before.
like,
Um,
so it was you should have been losing weight, just not at the pace you were like, not at the
yeah,
pace
I
you had
should.
set as the goal.
Yeah, right. And I shouldn't be gaining. But
Okay.
when I was
No, it's
saying
just like
that
if you're in a
before,
calorie deficit and gaining weight, it's interesting.
yeah. So I said that to my wife before we started recording, and she said to me, I feel like every time you've gotten back into like a jogging rhythm, you've gone up in weight and complained. So I'm hoping that she's remembering that correctly. And something my body's doing is like holding in something, and then I'll purge. I don't know. I don't know the science, and to be honest, I usually have a better memory than she does, but I hope she's right. So we'll
Hey,
see.
we'll see. And I have another question for you.
Yeah.
Um, do you just weigh yourself on Thursday mornings?
Thursday nights before we record.
Okay, but is that the only time throughout the
Yep.
week?
Yeah.
So
I'm.
I'm gonna
I've tried.
it's a
Yeah.
segue into my story here. So
Okay.
when we last recorded 2 episodes ago, for those listening sequentially, I was, I think, 184.2.
Hmm.
And I, as I mentioned, went to Tampa, and I actually found out I'm a member of the YMCA, and I'd mentioned I can travel with the membership, and there's a YMCA 5 minutes from the house we were renting. And so I actually made it there, I think, 4 times over the course of the week. Plus, we had gotten annual passes to Busch Gardens because it was the same price as a one-day ticket. And so we went several times and like one day I ended up burning like 1,200 calories and like 25,000 steps. And so, on like a mobility day. So like I got either the steps in or the workout in, and I was feeling really good coming back. And I step on the scale, I weigh myself daily. And
Mm,
I've gotten in a habit of that. I didn't over spring break because I didn't take my scale with me, but I don't want it to be the same scale. So, if it's off by a pound or two, I'm not, oh God, why is it so far off? But I got back, stepped on the scale on Sunday morning, and I was 183. I was like, all right, heck yeah, that's 1.2 pounds lighter. I'm doing great. And then I hit my calorie goal every single day. Yesterday morning, Wednesday morning, I step on the scale, 182 even. I'm like, that's the
mm,
lowest I've ever weighed in since we've started this thing in a daily weigh-in. It's way lower than anything I've like had at my Thursday weigh-in. And then I was like, I need to make sure I'm like staying hydrated so I can continue flushing everything out. And I mentioned my wife and I went on a date night, went to Michael's and stuff, and we went out for drinks. And right beforehand, I went to the bathroom and I noticed I was pretty dehydrated. And God knows what possessed me, but I was like, I must need electrolytes. I must need salt. Right. And so I put salt in water just to like help boost my hydration or something. I counted my calories. We ate very sparingly, like some appetizers, and then had a dinner at home. And like, I was, you know, I was like under my calorie count. And then I step on the scale this morning. I look in the mirror. I look puffy as can be. I step on the scale. I went from 182 to 185.8 in
mm,
24 hours. And so
mm.
like my official weigh-in number is like would make it seem like spring break kind of, threw me off course. And I'm like, no, I think tomorrow morning I'm going to be down a couple of pounds because I didn't do the salt. I just did the water today. And like my face feels a lot different than it looked this morning. But I was like, just that's why I'm curious about, maybe changing up some of your data points and where you do it. Because I wanted to provide that anecdote to people that like you can't always use that as a cop out. Oh, I must have had a lot of salt and I'm retaining water. Because if you say that every time, if you say that
Mhm.
every time you get your number, that's probably not what it is. But
Yeah, I'm
if you have you can have those kind of fluctuations because let's say I didn't just like drink salt water. Let's say I went out and had a bunch of really salty food or something like that, and it just made me,
mhm.
balloon up. Those are the kind of fluctuations that people talk about when it's like you shouldn't just like take one number one time and go, this is it, and all that. And I must have been
So,
doing bad.
yeah, there was a time in my life where I did weigh myself every day, but
Sure.
like I would see the number and I would forget everything I know about, did I have a salty dinner the night? Like, you know,
Sure.
it's like I'll weigh my like I remember one time I weighed myself like on a Monday morning when I had sushi the night before, which is the easiest way to retain weight, right? so, so I do stick to just the Thursday nights before we record because for the most part, my Monday to Thursday is usually the same. Weekends can
Well, you
be
went out
kind of
for
like,
dinner last night, and so it brought up the idea to me of like, what if you had more
oh,
salt
okay.
because you were having,
I
you
mean,
know,
yeah, I definitely did. We went to this subpar Mexican restaurant, and
yeah,
part of me didn't want more food, but I was like, I feel like I need to have another plate to make up for 10 years of tuition. So I had like half a plate extra than I wanted.
yeah.
Because as we've talked about on this podcast, I struggle with um, my intuitive eating versus my return on investment.
Sure.
And yeah, so
Yeah, and I think, I get it. I've had
yeah.
problematic experiences with weighing daily, and so I
Mm,
think we mentioned it when we were sort of kicking this series off with our dieting
yeah.
episode that yeah, it can lead to some negative thoughts and behaviors of like, oh, I was expecting this, and now I'm
Hmm.
not just not there, I'm way further behind. And that
Yeah.
means like, I've had days where it's like, okay, I'm just gonna eat apples and like a salad for lunch today because like I need to undo this. Like, I'm going to
Mhm.
undo it in a day. And like,
Right.
obviously, when I say that out loud and when I say it to you, you're like, this is a ridiculous behavior.
But in the moment, you
Where,
feel that way sometimes.
and where I have presently feel like I'm fortunate enough to be in a position of is like, I have just spent so much time consuming resources about it and like heard so many smart people and so many smart data points that are just like calories in, calories out, don't win the day, win the week, win the month, win the 3
Mhm.
months, take it slow, take it steady, the math will even out. And like where I have my calories now, I think it's either at like 3/4 of a pound per week or a pound a week. Um,
Mhm.
and that's about the upper threshold I want, but what it allows me is sort of that buffer, as you mentioned, of like, okay, I didn't hit my number, but if I'm over my number by a little bit, or the, packaging estimates or whatever are off, or my portion size was slightly different, I've got a little buffer of like, I can still be a calorie deficit, no matter what. And over time, that will pay the dividends. And so that's what it's come to for me of like,
Mhm.
if I'm having a couple bad weigh-ins, I look in the mirror and I go, you haven't been logging your calories. You have no idea what's been going in. You've been doing a terrible
Mhm.
job. And I mentioned that earlier this season, right? I'd been doing a terrible job of logging, and that had continued up until I went to Tampa. And for some reason, I just decided I'm going on vacation and I have the tools at my disposal. And like we were cooking a few meals in our, part of why we got a rental home instead of like a hotel, and I'm like, I have a lot of control over my exercise and over my diet this week. Like, I am not going to use like vacation mode as an excuse to
Mhm.
like let myself add any bad habits that I don't want to take home with me. And I got back into counting my calories and I'd been doing a really good job. I'd been hovering around the same portion and kind of like lucking into some weight loss on Thursdays. And I was like, man, I've been hitting it. I've been hitting it hard and I'm doing great. And I know that the math will keep on mathing as long as I keep up that process and stop worrying so much about the results. But that's a tough place to get to. And so when I say things like, it's just calories in, calories out, controlling the calories in is a whole mental game. Controlling the calories out is a whole mental game. Doing it consistently is hard as can be, right? And when I say
Mhm.
it's just simply, looking at it of like the process, not the results, like
Oh,
I'm about to be 35 next weekend, man, and it's taken me most of that time to get to this place through some pretty dark places.
well, you actually said it perfectly, quoting one of the researchers when we first introduced this segment. It's it's simple math, but that doesn't mean it's easy to do.
Yeah,
And yeah.
yeah, it is simple math and it is hard as heck. And this was coming from a guy who is like either amateur or pro bodybuilder, and so he does like some of the like severe cuts, right, to get down to a certain like body fat percentage for showtime, and then like bulking and all
Mhm.
this stuff. And he's like, I count my calories way more than like the recreational person would necessarily need to get some like decent physique goals, right? And
Mhm.
it's the same thing of just like, yeah, like basically I'm competing in a sport using nothing but my body. And
Right.
so yeah, it's tough. So if you're out there and you're struggling, start again tomorrow and don't try to bite it all off. You have to start from where you are and you have to do it slow and steady, but consistent beats one good day, whether that's working out, whether that's eating right. It's just like find the thing that is a small calorie deficit, 100, 200 calories that you can do consistently and say, 5 years from now, if I'm doing this, great.
Mhm.
Find that thing, go do that thing. And then 5 years from now, you'll look back and you'll go, really glad I started.
Yep. Um, like we mentioned in the beginning of the episode, I am actually traveling next week, so we are going to be recording next week's episode right now. It's going to be another fun episode with the theme within the theme of this month. So there won't be a weigh-in, there won't be story time, but we didn't want to leave all of you hanging next week. So again, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. make sure you hit that notification button to see when these videos post. And as always, thank you so much for working on the Dad Pod with us. And have a good night, everybody.
Thanks for working on the Dad Pod with us. Any resources that we mentioned during the show will be in the show notes. If you have questions, thoughts, or just want to talk with us, the best place is in the comments on YouTube. We're on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Threads at Working on the Dad Pod, and on Twitter at Working on Dad Pod. Following and subscribing is always appreciated. Please rate and review us. That helps get the show to new people. And if you know a dad who would enjoy our show, sharing it with them is a huge help to them and us. Have a great week.